The West Virginia Mountaineers are coming into the 2025 college football season once again having to prove people wrong. And it starts with Phil Steele. In his 2025 college football preview magazine, Phil Steele has West Virginia ranked 16th out of 16 teams in his Big 12 preseason rankings. That's right, dead last in the league. Courtesy of this tweet put out by Mr. Josh Furlong. Well, I decided to take a deeper dive into why Phil Steele has West Virginia ranked so low. And that's what we're talking about in this episode of Couz's Corner. And we're going to have that conversation, and I'll give you my opinion on Phil's rankings right after this word from one of our sponsors. Since 1931, the attorneys at Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner have been the voice for victims who have suffered serious injury or death. They have a fierce passion for truth and justice and a sincere compassion for those who have been wronged by others. Whether you have been in a car accident or fighting with an insurance company, or you or a loved one has suffered serious injury or death due to medical negligence, we will ensure your voice is heard loud and clear. Katz, Cantor, Stone Street, and Buckner will ensure there is justice for all West Virginians because we are your lawyer, your voice. Visit us at yourlawyeryourvoice.com. What is up? Welcome to this episode of Couz's Corner, where we serve up top shelf college football news and analysis centered around the West Virginia Mountaineers and the Big 12. Why did Phil still have West Virginia ranked so low? Well, it all boils down to this. It's a rebuild. He's looking at this roster, looking at all the question marks on this roster, and the fact that West Virginia, when he talked to Coach Rodriguez in the summer, he says a third of the team was not even there yet. So how can you predict him to finish high in the league when half of the roster is not even there yet? He says there's just too many moving pieces for him for this roster. Now, he goes on to talk about some talent that they do have, and he even mentions about how Rich Rod has proved him wrong multiple times throughout his career, which we'll touch on later. But he's not wrong. There's a lot of moving pieces, a lot of moving parts, a lot of unknowns. 50 transfers that Rich Rod's bringing into the program. Only 6 returning starters on defense, and that's including the transfers who started at other schools. None that started games to close last season for West Virginia. And only a couple of starters on the offensive side of the ball who was starting at the end of last season. That's Rodney Gallagher and Jaheim White. So not a lot of starters returning for this team. So it's fair, in my opinion, to pick them low. Now, should they have been picked dead last? I don't think so. Because as we go through this and I talk about Coach Rod's track record, I think you'll understand why. But here's one of the big problems, or one of the big question marks that Phil Steele had with this team, and I think it's fair. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think it's fair, and that is the defense. When you look at the defense, I mentioned the 6 returning starters. Those are all guys he's including as starters from their previous stops. Guys like Fred Perry, who followed Rich Rod to West Virginia from Jacksonville State. Guys like Jamoy Robinson, the former American Conference Defensive Player of the Year, who is coming over from UTSA, who Phil Steele has tabbed as a first-team All-Big 12 performer this year. Michael Coach Jr., another All-Big 12 performer he has tabbed at defensive back, coming over from Nevada. But here's the problem. Those guys have started, but they've not started in Morgantown, and they've not started at the P4 level. Can they do it? It's an unknown. But there's only a few of those guys. There's only a handful of those guys. The rest of them will likely be guys who have not started a lot of games, if any. They're going to be leaning on a lot of guys who have not started football games at the college level. And that's a concern for Phil Steele. As a matter of fact, there's so much of a question mark, he decided to let his computer decide what he thought the season would look like for the Mountaineers on defense. And here's what the computer came up with. And let's hope, West Virginia fans, that this is not accurate. But here's what it said. That West Virginia would give up 388 yards per game on defense and 30.7 points per game on defense. Let's hope those numbers aren't true. That would be horrific. Now, specifically when it comes to the secondary, which is where West Virginia has struggled a lot over the past few years, it's a complete rebuild again. I mentioned Michael Coach Jr. They're bringing over, and I mentioned Fred Perry, who's likely going to be playing the spear position. They're bringing over guys like Devontae Golden Nelson, Justin Harrington, guys who have talent, but again, they've not played together, and they've not played, for the most part, with the exception of Perry and a couple other guys, have not played for Coach Rodriguez, and for the most part have not played at the Power 4 level and faced the talent they're going to be facing this year. And we don't know if they're going to perform. We don't know if they're going to be able. Look, if you look back in history, It typically takes guys who move up a level a few games to adjust to the speed. They're not going to have that luxury. Now, they'll have a couple games because they'll be playing a G5 team and an FCS team, but game 3 of the season, you got Pitt coming to town. They better be ready by game 3, or it could be a long season. Rich Rod doesn't want to lose that Pitt game on 9/13. All right. Now, when you look at some individual position groups, I mentioned the DBs. It's a complete rebuild. The linebacker position, he says they are talented there and they do have some experience. Guys like Chase Wilson coming over from Colorado State, who he also has tabbed as a potential All-Big 12 performer. But again, the problem is, can he do it at the P4 level, and can he do it under Coach Rodriguez and Coach Zach Alley? The defensive line, obviously Jamoy Robinson expected to be a stud. Who else steps up? Can Edward Vesterinen, stack on to his success he had at West Virginia under Neil Brown after missing last season with an injury? Can he come back and be back to his form he was at before he got injured? It might take him a few games to adjust. Can guys like Hammond Russell step up? Can guys like Corey McIntyre step up? Can Eddie Kelly, the transfer from Missouri, how good can he be? How good can some of these other transfers be? Devin Grant, to name a few. Again, big old question marks that nobody knows the answer to until they get on the gridiron. All right. Let's switch over to the offensive side of the ball. There are more positives here, but still a lot of question marks. With the biggest one being, again, and I talk about this ad nauseum, I'm almost tired of talking about it, but it's the offensive line. They lost everybody, all 5 starters to either graduation or the portal, 3 of their top backups to the portal. Landon Livingston, who's projected to be the starter at center by Phil Steele, has started 1 game in his career. Walter Youngbear, who's one of the projected starters at guard, started 12 games a year ago, but it was for Tulsa. Will it translate to West Virginia? Xavier Bosley, who came from Jacksonville State last season, has some starting experience for Coach Rod at Jacksonville State. But it's been a couple of years. You've also got, Carson Lee, who came over from the G5 level. How well will he do on the O-line at the P4 level? And again, how will these guys play together as a unit? That's the big question. Can they gel? With a lot of them not being on the team at spring camp, it might be tough. It might be tough. And, when you look at some of these other position groups that Phil Steele and many others expect to be good, how good can they be if the offensive line can't block? Again, huge, huge concern. Look at the wide receiver position. He expects the wide receiver position to be similar to 2024, to put up similar numbers. They lost Hudson Clement. They lost Traylon Ray. They lost, Justin Robinson to graduation. But they're bringing back Rodney Gallagher. They're bringing back Jaden Bray, who hopefully will be healthy. Preston Fox decided to come back. He's going to be a good veteran presence in that room. They got the highly talented Cam Vaughn, who I think could end up being a superstar that nobody's talking about. So they've got talent there, and they do have some experience. Again, how will it translate, and how well will they do under Rich Rod's system? I think all of these guys can succeed in Rich Rod's system, but if the quarterback can't throw and the running backs can't run because of the offensive line, will it work? Will it work? Now let's talk about 2 of the positives, the running back room and the quarterback room. When you look at the running back room, Phil Steele has West Virginia's running back room as one of the top in the Big 12. He says they have experience, depth, talent, and speed. And when you look and get the quarterback room, even though Phil Steele has West Virginia's quarterback room rated 11th in the conference, or tied for 11th in the conference, Rich Rod has a ton of confidence in that. When he talked to Coach Rod, here's what Coach Rich Rodriguez said about his quarterback room. He says it might be the deepest quarterback room he's ever had. Folks, that's a big statement. He's coached people like Pat White. Now, yes, he's not saying anybody's as good as Pat White, but when you look at the depth of the whole room, he thinks it's the deepest he's ever had. So that sounds good. The running back room sounds good. So there are some positives. It's not all negative. And the biggest positive, though, might be Rich Rod himself. Now, when you look at Phil Steele's track record predicting Rich Rodriguez teams, he hasn't done very well. 2023, Rich Rod's second season at Jacksonville State. It was their first season in Conference USA. He pegged them to finish near the bottom or at the bottom of Conference USA because they were playing primarily with FCS level guys, because remember, they had just come up from the FCS a couple years prior. They went out and won 9 games. Proved Phil Steele wrong. Last year, he thought they would do better, even though he didn't think they had enough talent, and they lost a ton of talent. Rich Rod had to bring in 60 new players last year. He thought they would take a little bit of a step back and finish third in the conference. What'd they do? They went out and won 9 games again and won the conference. Phil Steele even had a quote in his magazine from last year, the 2024 edition, that Rich Rod, and I'm paraphrasing this, but he said, I have often been proven wrong by Coach Rich Rodriguez. And, so he's cautious to even pick West Virginia last because of that, because he's been proven wrong by Rich Rod so many times. And when you look at Rich Rod's offensive history, the last time he was at West Virginia, the 2007 season, they averaged 39.6 points per game. Last year at Jacksonville State, his offense averaged 36 points per game. So he expects the offense will improve some from last year's 29.2 points per game under Neil Brown, but will it be enough to propel them to compete in the Big 12? Phil Steele doesn't think so, because he just thinks there are too many question marks, too many holes to fill, and it's being filled by players we know little about, and it just doesn't feel comfortable picking West Virginia any higher than dead last. Now, do I think Phil Steele's right? I don't. I think West Virginia is going to finish much better than dead last in the league. However, do I think this is some conspiracy and West Virginia is being disrespected? I don't, because as someone who predicts and does analysis myself on this channel, if I look at a roster and I see they have 50 transfers and 70 new players, I'm probably going to pick them near the bottom. So I have no problem with where Phil Steele picked West Virginia. And as a fan of the team, it's an opportunity for them to go out and use this as motivation. They can play with a chip on their shoulder, much like the Neil Brown team from 2023 did, and then go out and prove some people wrong. Hang this up in the locker room. Put it on the bulletin boards. Put it everywhere in the facilities. 16th. Go back to the speech Charles Wesley Godwin did before that season. They picked y'all 14th. Well, guess what? They picked y'all 16th. Go out and prove them wrong. Let's hope they can do that in 2025. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Also, if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button. It really helps that YouTube algorithm will get this video seen by more people. I want to give another shout out to my sponsors, Cat Scanner, Stone Street, and Buckner, and also the folks over here, Appalachia Digital. If you're looking to build yourself a brand new website, go to appalachiadigital.com/Couz. Let them know I sent you. Or if you need to get your site found on Google, they can help you do that too. Again, appalachiadigital.com/Couz. They are the ones who designed my brand new website, which, you see the logo for that in the background, wvsportschat.com. They did a fantastic job over there. They can do the same for you. I want to thank you for tuning into this show. I hope the rest of your day is top shelf. God bless, and Q Country Roads.